Right now, there are more private equity funds in America than McDonald's locations. Think about that for a second. An entire industry built on moving money between wealthy investors has more physical presence than a corporation that feeds 25 million people every single day. We're talking about 19,000 hedge funds and PE firms managing trillions in capital for the ultra-rich versus 14,000 golden arches serving billions of burgers to regular Americans. This isn't just an interesting statistic. It's a blueprint. The economy has made a calculated decision that there's more profit in shuffling assets for a few thousand billionaires than feeding millions of families. When Wall Street has more addresses than the most ubiquitous symbol of American consumer culture, you're looking at an economy that has fundamentally rewritten the rules about who matters and who doesn't. Last week, the Bureau of Economic Analysis announced that America's economy surged forward at 3.8% in the second quarter. If you're not an economics nerd, let me translate what that number is supposed to mean for you. When the economy grows at 3.8%, that should mean more jobs, better wages, increased opportunity. Companies expanding, hiring, investing. In theory, that growth should eventually trickle down to your paycheck, your job security, your ability to afford rent without choosing between groceries and healthcare. There's just one problem. Most Americans aren't in that economy anymore. This isn't your standard inequality lecture. We've all heard that the rich keep getting richer while everyone else treads water. That's old news. What's happening now cuts deeper than unequal distribution. We're witnessing the wholesale irrelevance of the majority to the basic functioning of American capitalism. Consider what that 3.8% growth figure actually measures. GDP calculations sum household consumption, business investment, government spending, and exports. Then subtract imports. But open the detailed report and you'll find a footnote that rewrites the entire narrative. In the first quarter of this year, imports exploded upward by 38% as retailers frantically stockpiled inventory before tariff deadlines. The second quarter told the opposite story. Imports collapsed by 29% because warehouses sat full. Here's where accounting gymnastics become economic propaganda. GDP calculations subtract imports from the total. So when import volumes crater, GDP numbers artificially inflate. The report itself admits this swing contributed 5.1 percentage points to that headline growth rate. Strip away the import distortions, and you're left with an economy that contracted at an annualized rate of 1.2%. 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP contraction. I'm sure the comment section can tell you what that's technically called, but the real story isn't hidden in technical adjustments. It's written in the architecture of who matters and who doesn't. And this is where I need you to really pay attention, because these next few numbers determine whether you still have a seat at the table or whether you've already been written out of the equation. Personal consumption represents 68% of American economic activity. That sounds like consumer power, like businesses need to keep you happy or they'll lose customers. Here's the reality. Half of all consumer spending comes from just the top 10% of households. If you're making less than about $175,000 a year as a household, you're in the bottom 90%. And your entire economic cohort collectively accounts for only half of what the economy considers important. The bottom 60% of households, families making under $80,000 a year, together contribute less than 20% of total spending. Think about what that means. More than half of American families could completely vanish tomorrow, and the economy would barely notice a 20% dip in consumer activity. Now think about your own situation. Your rent payment that increases every year while your salary doesn't. Your car payment on a vehicle you financed for 6 years because it was the only way to afford something reliable enough to get to work. Your grocery bill that somehow hits $200 for what used to cost $120. That argument with your partner last month about whether you could afford to turn the heat up. Every financial decision you make, every sacrifice to stay current on your bills, every extra shift you work to cover expenses. To the broader economy, all of that effort, all of that stress registers as a rounding error. You're economically optional. And much of that 20% isn't even real purchasing power anymore. It's borrowed time, credit card balances at record highs, auto loans stretching past 7 years at interest rates that would have been illegal a generation ago. That family spending $3,000 a month isn't contributing $3,000 to the economy. They're contributing whatever they're actually earning, minus the interest payments flowing upstream to people who already have money. Here's what this means for you practically. Companies know these numbers. They've done the math. That's why customer service has become an automated phone tree. That's why your complaints get ignored. That's why shrinkflation keeps shrinking your groceries while prices climb. They don't need you happy. They need you alive enough to keep making minimum payments. Look at what's actually happening. AI infrastructure investment contributed more to GDP growth last quarter than personal consumption did. Ferrari's market capitalization now doubles Honda's. A company selling a few thousand cars a year to ultra-wealthy buyers is worth twice as much as one selling millions of affordable vehicles to regular people. Walmart is actively courting upscale shoppers while letting its traditional locations deteriorate. The market has rendered its verdict. There's more profit in serving champagne to thousands than hamburgers to millions. Medieval lords needed their serfs. Today's economic aristocracy doesn't need you at all. The economy doesn't need you as a consumer. What about as a worker? 40 years ago, productivity per worker doubled even after adjusting for inflation. You're producing twice as much value and seeing less than a quarter of the benefit. Median wages have grown just 20% over those same 4 decades while your output doubled. But here's the cruel irony. That 20% wage growth concentrates almost entirely in things that don't build lives. A big TV costs less today than ever. You can stream unlimited entertainment for $15 a month. Meanwhile, a starter home costs 8 times the median income instead of 3 times like it did for your parents. College tuition has increased 1,200% since 1980. Healthcare costs have tripled as a percentage of income. The things you want got cheaper. The things you need to build a stable middle-class life became unattainable. You can afford a bigger TV to watch from the apartment you'll rent forever while paying off student loans into your 40s. Modern technology hasn't just made workers more efficient, it's made them interchangeable. A bank manager once required a year of mentorship to train. Today, algorithms do the work and any competent adult can learn the role in 2 weeks. Travel agents, analysts, brokers, all replaced by apps that democratized access while annihilating middle-skill jobs. Artificial intelligence will accelerate this trend. Even if it doesn't eliminate jobs wholesale, it will continue standardizing roles until workers become fungible units in an oversupplied market. The economic value of your labor approaches zero not because you work less hard, but because technology has made your effort less scarce. Now you might be thinking, if nobody has jobs, nobody can buy products, and the whole system collapses. Except that's not how market concentration works. When labor and consumers lose power, the market doesn't collapse. It simply redirects output to those who still have money. The economy doesn't need you as a worker. So what about as an investor? The top 10% of households own 93% of corporate equities. Those same households account for just 5.4% of non-mortgage consumer debt. If you're carrying a 20% APR auto loan while contributing $500 monthly to a brokerage account, you're not an investor. You're a wealth transfer mechanism, paying interest that exceeds your returns while convincing yourself you're building equity. This concentration creates a nightmare scenario. Mass unemployment could occur alongside continued GDP growth because the unemployed contribute so little that their absence barely registers. The Federal Reserve has essentially admitted they can't help ordinary workers without helping wealthy asset owners far more. And here's where it gets truly terrifying. The top 10% who drive consumption spend freely because they feel wealthy from portfolio gains. If those assets deflate, there's no safety net. No mass consumer base ready to pick up the slack. Just a long fall through empty air. And to use the technical term, we're going to be absolutely fucked. The economy doesn't need you as a consumer, as a worker, or as an investor. This should be the moment for conspiracy theories. Except we don't need theories when we have documents. In 2005, Citigroup circulated reports to ultra-high net worth clients describing a plutonomy, an economy powered by and designed for the wealthy few. The report stated plainly that in a plutonomy, there are rich consumers disproportionate in their income and consumption, and the rest accounting for surprisingly small bites of the national pie. The analysts weren't critiquing this system. They were recommending it as an investment thesis. Buy companies that cater exclusively to the wealthy because eventually they'll be the only customers worth serving. That report circulated 19 years ago. Every trend it identified has accelerated. If this sounds far-fetched, Steve Eisman, the investor who predicted the 2008 financial crisis, gave an extended interview on exactly this dynamic just last week. The man who saw the subprime mortgage collapse coming is now warning about consumption collapse, and nobody's listening. Citigroup has tried scrubbing these documents from public access, which only confirms their significance. They're a blueprint explaining exactly how modern capitalism was restructuring itself to bypass the majority. And if you're watching this video, you probably weren't the target customer. The reports identified one vulnerability: political enfranchisement. Wealth concentrates, but votes remain relatively distributed. The risk was that eventually the irrelevant majority might use democratic power to reclaim economic relevance. 20 years later, that risk looks increasingly theoretical. Voter participation information stagnates. Political literacy declines. We keep voting against our own material interests because we've been convinced that culture war victories matter more than economic power. That 3.8% GDP growth isn't fabricated. The numbers are real within the framework of how we measure economic activity. But that framework was designed for an economy where prosperity flowed broadly, where consumer spending reflected mass purchasing power, where labor commanded value. That economy is dead. We're living in its successor, where growth benefits the few, where consumption concentrates among the comfortable, where labor becomes expendable and investment remains inaccessible. The measurements continue, but they no longer measure what we think they measure. They track the health of an economy that most of us don't meaningfully participate in anymore. We could see unemployment spike, wages stagnate, and consumer debt explode while GDP keeps growing and markets keep hitting new highs. The economic indicators we've relied on for decades to signal crisis simply won't trigger because the people experiencing the crisis don't register in those measurements anymore. This isn't inevitable. Economic structures are human creations, subject to human revision. Tax policy, labor law, antitrust enforcement, financial regulation, all tools that can redistribute power and rebuild broad-based prosperity. But you know what they say about trickle-down economics? Turns out the only thing that trickles down is the realization that you were never supposed to catch any of it in the first place.